guys, I'm Nick Wisdom, and this is another installment of a Hack TV build series. This one will be focused on the XL Power Specter 700 V2, which is the next evolution in XL Power's very successful 700 size helicopter. It's very highly acclaimed. It's a fantastic heli. It's flown by world-class pilots in top-level 3D competitions. But it's also can be said to be extremely gentle in the hands of someone as their very first 700. It's well known to have very affordable parts costs and be a great 700 to really try and advance your skills on, because if you do crash it, it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg for a boom or various other replacement parts, and it's built really well. It's a proven design. It relies on some of the original components from the Specter V1 that has a great reputation, but there's been a number of fantastic improvements on it. But we're not going to dwell on that. We're going to go ahead and dig into the build series. We're going to go ahead and get started. A few changes since the last build series, which the first one we did was on the Raw 700, and you can go ahead and check that out. There's a link in the description below if you're interested in that. But done a few additions to the workshop that you'll see us do here, including the ability to sort of live switch, so we can cut to the overhead camera here. As we dig into the build, you can see we've got our steps to do. We start working on the head coming up, and then we're going to be able to switch to the manual and make a couple of references over here, and then come back here as we dig into things. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so everyone sort of has their preferences in the order in which they build a helicopter, and while the manual is a guide, you don't necessarily have to follow it page by page. So I am going to start with the main rotor head on the helicopter, but I'm going to do it in a little bit of my own order. And I'm going to start by hooking up the blade grip arms to our blade grip. So let's go ahead and get all these parts unpackaged and our screws cleaned, and we'll go ahead and get started from there. Okay, so before we go ahead and dig into the main head, I'm going to just talk a little bit, just once, and then I'm going to do it for every single step of the helicopter along the way without necessarily talking about it. So let's talk a little bit about cleaning our bolts, screws, whatever your preference to call them. I'm sure we all refer to them differently. So first thing you're going to want to do is use either an alcohol solution with a very low water content, also very high proof. I tend to use acetone to clean my screws, and here's what I do. And it's very important you do this for all of your screws and bolts, is I just wet a paper towel with it, and then I take a driver, and I take the bolt, wrap it in a paper towel, and I just spin it a couple of times with each bolt or screw as I go through, and squeeze tightly on the bolt, move it to a clean spot of the paper towel, and move on. And then I'll do this for every single piece of hardware we're going to use throughout the process. If you don't do this, the oils that are used in machining the screws can actually prevent the Loctite from doing its job. Now, some folks like to use some Loctites that are oil tolerant and claim that that will take care of things. I think you'll find in the hobby there's a lot of personal preferences along the way, and we all like to do different things. I much prefer and feel more confident in just simply cleaning all of the hardware that we'll use as a rule. And I've never had one back out on me for any reason, so I feel a lot better, especially these little, like this is the ball that'll go into the blade grip arm, and it's the whole way your helicopter is controlled. You don't want this thing backing out at all. So with that, that's our bolts cleaned. We're going to do this for every step. You can see all the nasty oil that comes off of there. So from now on throughout the build video, just assume that I've gone ahead and cleaned all of the bolts and hardware, because I have. And with that, let's go ahead and get into the blade grip. So let's take a quick look at the manual. We're on page 5 here, and it's pretty straightforward. We're going to use the blade grip arm, and you can see here we have our choice of the inner hole for a little more agile, so for better 3D performance, and then the outer hole for a little bit more stability. I've always used the outer hole in my V1, and I'm going to do the same thing on my V2. for the way I fly, and then we're going to take these 2 bolts and just install the blade grip arm. So let's go ahead and get that done. So let's talk a little bit about Loctite while we're here. Now, I tend to use a plastic bag. I use the parts bags, and I just go ahead and put some Loctite on the bag, and then again, I'm not going to talk through this for every step, but we'll do it here. I get a little paper towel ready on the side, and then here's what I do. I take our bolts that we're going to use. We're going to mount the blade grip arms here onto the blade grips, and I take the bolt and I just run it in the puddle of Loctite, and then I'll take my finger and really work that Loctite into the threads, and I took most of it off. Most of that is on my fingertip. And it's just a little bit on the threads, and then I'll take a paper towel and wipe most of that excess off. And then I'm going to push the bolt through and go ahead and get this started here. And I'm just going to loosely get that one going, get the Loctite on the other screw. You'll find I use the word screw and bolt interchangeably. I don't know why, but I do. It's because I can't make up my mind which they are. Is it a machine screw? See, do screws have like biting threads, tapping threads? I don't know. Anyway. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and snug these both down. There is a little bit of a raised area that this blade grip arm wraps around, so just make sure you're flush with that. Don't go crazy tightening these, but certainly don't leave them loose. I tend to give everything just a little bit of a oomph, but not too much. I know that's sort of not a great quantification, but you'll know. Don't over tighten things. It's very easy with these small screws. Alright, so now we're going to move to some red Loctite. So what's the difference between red Loctite and blue Loctite? So red is semi-permanent. It has a stronger bite to it, and it's harder to remove. You need to use some heat on the actual hardware to get the red Loctite to let go. It otherwise is a fairly permanent bond. So same process here. Push it into the threads, and now I'm just going to go ahead and screw this into the outer hole of our blade grip arm here. Let's move this way. And then you can see there's just a little bit has sort of squeeged out here, so I take my paper towel because I like a nice looking helicopter, and I'll go ahead and wipe all that extra that kind of squeezed out there. Must have left a little too much on the threads. And then this guy's ready. I'm going to go ahead and repeat for the other side. Okay, and with that we've got both of our blade grips ready to go. We're going to go ahead and move on to the main head block. Alright, so before we get into the main head block, it's important to just make a little bit of an explanation here of how XL Power does their manuals and their sub-assemblies. So this is how the main head block comes out of the package, and you can see our radius arms are pre-installed, but sort of pre-installed. So XL Power does this great job of these assembling these sub-assemblies to let you know how they go together. So these pieces are all in the correct order as they'll be installed in the helicopter, but none of the bolts have been cleaned here, and there's no Loctite applied, nor are any of them tightened. They're all just finger tightened. So all of these assemblies we're going to take apart and put the screws aside. We'll clean them just like we would, clean everything else, and then we'll reassemble them at the appropriate time, because, in this case, we're going to work with all of these radius arms removed as we stuff the dampeners and whatnot inside the main head block here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all these parts here, and I'm going to take out these bolts here, pull the radius arms off. We'll also take out the Jesus bolt, as we call it, and that as well. So I'll work on that now. Okay, a quick note about these radius arms. There is a teeny tiny washer. Oh, there it is right here. See, it already fell off. Let me see. I'll put it on a fingertip here, and you can see it here. Right there. That teeny washer sits on top. So just be careful when you remove that, that you don't lose it. So make sure you have both of those. I'm going to set them right here, along with the 2 bolts for those, and our Jesus bolt. And we're just going to leave those there. Okay, so Now what we're going to do is go back to the main head block, and we're going to work on installing our dampeners. We've got our grease that we're going to talk about in a second to go with that, but let's go ahead and look into the manual first. Okay, so looking at the manual, you can see here that our head dampeners, they do offer a couple different choices, but only one is included with the kit, and it's a little bit confusing because some of the exploded diagram over here is what they show. And this, if you look down here, is actually the optional dampeners. So these guys here are the ones that are included, and we're going to go ahead and work on those next. So these dampeners here, we take this piece here that's got these ridges on it, and we're going to take these rubber O-rings, we're going to grease them, and then fit them over the top of this, and then get these in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. When it comes to grease used on dampeners, there's a few folks who use different products. Everyone will tell you that, you know, maybe the one you like is wrong. The important thing is that it's a clear synthetic grease. I use Triflow brand. It's easy to get. It's on Amazon and a number of hardware stores as well. But it needs to be a clear synthetic grease for sure. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to get messy here. Get some paper towel close by, because these steps get a little funky, and I'll show you how to do one. And what I do is I just get a little bit of grease on my finger, and I'll just sort of run the dampener around, and then I'm going to go ahead and slide it over. And this is a little bit sort of a fussy pain in the butt, but I like to get some grease under the dampeners. What's going on here? So I'm going to just work this over slowly, and of course your fingers get all slippery from the grease. And these are meant to be tight, so it's not easy to go ahead and get these on here, but we will prevail, of course. Ah, there we go. All right, so there's one down. Let's get one more on. Oh, that one wasn't so bad. All right, so there's one done. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do the other one, and we'll be right back. All right, now, just in case you're wondering, this is a silicone build mat. It's available on Amazon. It's meant for, you know, doing electronics work or whatnot, but I like to make sure I have one of these down whenever I'm doing anything working with grease and whatnot, because I don't care if it gets dirty. They're essentially, you know, you can replace them every year, every couple of years when they get pretty dinged up and messy. But anyway, all right, let's keep going. So now we have our two dampeners ready to go, and then we're going to go ahead and look back at the manual here to figure out which way they go. Now this little orange square here tells you which is the inside and the outside. And there's a little bit of kind of a stepped bevel, and you sort of have to stare at the picture. One side here has a tiny bevel, and the other side is more of a cylindrical flat section here. So we're looking for the tiny bevel side. Let's go back to the manual, and the tiny bevel side is the outside. So the inside gets this sort of flatter section, and we're going to go ahead, get lots of grease on here, and slide them into our head block. So to do that, come back to here, we're going to get a bunch of grease on our finger, and we're just going to put it all inside here and work it all around. I know some people will say that's way too much grease, you don't need that much, it's going to get all over everything. I don't care. I'd rather have too much than too little. And then we're also going to take our dampener, and we're going to grease that really well. And we're going to go around on the outside. And then we're going to take this, and we're going to push this again, little beveled section facing out, and we're going to gently work this into, and you have to be careful. I know you probably can't see because my fingers are all over this, but we're going to push it in, and we want to make sure that those these O-rings here don't get pushed off as we slide it in. So you can see we've gone ahead and done it, and then the piece that sticks out, you probably can't see this very well on camera, but this is the little beveled edge, is the piece that's sticking out. So we're going to go ahead and do the other side now. So go ahead, same thing, get some grease on our fingertips, and work it all in here. Make sure we get it all over, and then again, we'll get it all over the dampener as well. Let's figure out which section is the little beveled side that goes out, and which is our sort of squared off cylindrical section goes in. And then we're going to just gently start working this in. I swear this V2 one goes together much easier than the V1. The V1 was a little bit more of a battle, and I felt like the dampeners were coming off, but it's probably the same head block, and I'm making all of this up in my head. So you're going to end up spending a lot of time wiping grease off your fingers and off of parts. So I try and sort of give everything a little bit of a light wipe down as we go. And now we can go ahead and start assembling our main head. So I like to get this far here, where I've got my blade grips and I've got my main head block, and then I'm going to grab our feathering shaft here. We'll go ahead and get that unwrapped, and we'll get these two bolts on either end. It's very important you clean these because this is what stops the blades from coming off and flying at your head. So we're going to go ahead and open this up, get these cleaned. We're going to open our thrust washer packages here, and I'm going to get everything laid out in order of assembly, and then we'll come back and talk you through it. All right. Okay, so I've gone ahead and laid out our thrust bearings, our radial bearings, our washers, our feathering shaft, everything we need so that we can go ahead and install it all in the main head in the right order. But let's take a quick look at the manual here. So looking at the manual again here, you can see on page 4, it basically just shows us the radial bearings, which by the way are pre-installed in the blade grips. You'll have to pop one of them out. And the thrust bearings. And the most important thing to take away from this page is that the larger inside diameter thrust bearing goes closest to the head block, and that the more narrow one, and I'm going to show you how to figure out which one is which, goes further out away from the main head block. So let's look at our other page of assembly here, and you can see here that it shows, you know, our head block and our dampeners, that there's going to be a washer outside, and then after we have all of our thrust bearings and whatnot inside our blade grip, what goes on the outside. So it's unfortunate all this isn't on the same page, but worry not, because we're going to go ahead and dig into this together now. So this is our main head block. This is our feathering shaft that will go inside here in just a minute. And let's sort of walk through what's going on here. So the first thing we have here is just a regular old washer. This will go between here and the blade grip. So it'll be like that. And then everything from here on out is inside the blade grip. So this, since it's closest to the head block, is the larger inside diameter, meaning the circle inside the thrust bearing here. And if you look here, the way to tell this is you slide it over here, and if it wiggles like this, it's got the larger inside diameter and it goes closest to the head block. If we take the other one and we slide it onto our feathering shaft here, you'll notice it doesn't wiggle as much, so it's got a narrower inside diameter, and this will go further from. A couple other things to look at here. If you've never used a thrust bearing before, let's say you're moving up to a larger helicopter from maybe an OMP Hobby M2, something like that, or a Ripper 180 that's pre-built. There's a little groove inside here and on the smaller diameter thrust bearing, and that's going to work. This is the central part of our thrust bearing here, and it's got a cupped side and a non-cupped side. And these grooves, which we're going to fill with grease as we assemble this, is where these bearings will run, and these will assemble together as a complete thrust bearing like so, and then they'll turn against each other like this. And this is what a thrust bearing looks like once it's fully assembled. So I'm going to put this back in the right order with our smaller thrust bearing here. Now, these thrust bearings, and actually have the bearing balls in front of them. People will tell you that they should go cup side, so you can tell there's like a cavity that's called the cup side. Should go cup side in towards the main head block. There's an argument that says cup side should go out. The most important thing is that whatever you do on this side, you do on this side. I have my personal preference, which is cup side out. But some folks go the other way. Everyone has their reasons. I don't know which one is actually right, but this has worked for me without issue. So let's go ahead and start assembling. So the first thing we're going to do is work one blade grip at a time and get things filled up inside to outside. Now it's really important as we do this that we pay very close attention to the order of things and keep everything oriented such that it's going into the head block. So what I like to do is I take a driver and I'll work from outside in. So in this case it's going to be the radial bearing goes on first, then just a regular old washer. Make sure you use the correct washer. This washer is in the package with your thrust bearings. And now we're going to go ahead and get out the grease. So I've got my tube of grease here and I just put a little pressure on it. And I'm going to grab the first half of our thrust bearing and I'm going to fill this whole groove with grease. And then I'm going to slide it onto our driver. Again, that's the smaller diameter. Then we're going to take a lot of grease and we're going to fill this whole cup really well in between all of these bearings. And we're going to coat the other side as well. Really make sure we pack this well full. We want this all the way flush to the top with grease. And then again, I'm going to run cup side to the outside. So I'm going to slide this on next. I'm going to come back to our larger diameter part of our thrust bearing. Again, fill that groove with grease really well and then run the groove towards the thrust bearing. And then that is everything that's then going to slide inside the blade grip. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe a little bit of that grease off my finger so I don't coat everything here. And now I'm going to take our blade grip and then we're going to take our driver here and slide it in through and then line everything up. And most of it kind of let gravity work in our favor here as well. And then once you get it inside the grip, you're just going to push it down, get everything stacked up, and then gently set the blade grip aside because again, it's just sort of friction and grease holding this stuff in here. So we're going to keep it here. And then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Again, working from reverse out, these are the spacers that will go between the blade grip, and what's left on the outside here is the washer and bolt that will go into our feathering shaft here. And we'll install that in the head block in just a moment. So before all that, let's go ahead and start loading this one. Again, we're going to work from the outside out, so there's our radial bearing, there's our washer, and then we get to the first of the smaller diameter thrust bearing. We'll get that nice and greased up. Slide that there. And we're going lots of grease here. We're going to fill this cup again. I didn't quite get enough on my finger there. We're going to get a little more in there. Really make sure we get this. Again, better to have grease all over your fingers than not enough. And on the other side, we ran cup towards the outside, so we'll do that here as well. And then let's get some more grease on our larger diameter thrust bearing that ends up closer to the head block. And then we're ready to slide this in. Again, there is already in a bearing right here captured in our blade grip. So we're going to go ahead and slide this sub-assembly in. Yeah. You can see I'm just using the driver here. Get everything aligned. Really, it's the radial bearing is the tricky bit to get just right. But come on, get in there. And then there we go. Get everything slid in there. Let's let gravity be our friend here. Driver out of the way. Great. And then we'll go ahead and let this go. So again, now we've got our two spacers, our blade grips, and the next thing we want to do is go ahead and get our feathering shaft inside the main grips here, or inside the head block rather. So right now there is zero grease on here and just a little bit of grease you can sort of see in here. I'm actually going to take a driver and try and remove some of that. You can see it kind of splooges out everywhere there. So I'm going to run it in here, just kind of trying to take some of that grease out of there. Now why am I doing that? Because what I don't want are right now in here, these threads in the feathering shaft, ooh, I can't speak today, are grease free. And I want to get a really good Loctite adhesion in here. So what I don't want is when I slide this through here to get lots of grease inside these threads. So right now there's zero grease on this feathering shaft. And this is always a little bit fun to get through. It's a bit of a, all of a sudden it starts to come. You got to sort of push down hard, but not too hard. I'm using lots of pressure here to get it into the next dampener. Now, under no circumstances, if this gets tough, do you put pliers or mar the surface of this shaft in any way. It will affect the performance of your helicopter. So we're trying to keep this thing pristine as we try and push this. There it goes. Now we got a little bit of it to stick out, so it'll get a lot easier now. But that was not easy. So now we got it close. So now we can work with this. We're going to put just a little bit of grease on the shaft, not a ton. Just want to make sure it's lubricated. Again, being careful to keep any grease out of the ends. And then this side here that got a little bit of grease there, we're going to go ahead now and take some clean paper towel, and we're going to take one of our smaller drivers and just kind of wrap the paper towel around and then work it in and just really get as much of that grease out of the threads for the little bit that got in as we can. We're just going to work it around in there. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Okay, now the moment of truth. We're going to slide our two washers, one on each end here, or spacers I believe they call them. And I know this dampener is still sticking out a little bit. Don't worry, once we start tightening these bolts it will all get compressed for sure. And then we're going to go ahead and carefully slide our first blade grip. I usually take whichever side of the feathering shaft is a little bit longer, which in this case looks like this side, and I'll start there. So we'll go ahead and slide this guy in, beautiful, and then we're going to take some Loctite. Don't be shy with the Loctite here. You do not want this bolt coming out. This is what holds your blades to the rotating at high RPM hub. So I'm going to just soak this thing in Loctite, and then I'm going to work it into the threads with my fingertip. I'm not trying to leave this thing covered in Loctite, but I'm trying to make sure I work it into every bit of the threads of this bolt. And then I'm going to go ahead and throw this washer there, and then we're going to tighten it inside the blade grip to the end of the feathering shaft. So see if you can see that there. There we go. And I'm not going to worry about getting too tight at this point, because we're going to counter tighten this against the other side. So we've got this side on. Let's go ahead and work on the other side now. And then same thing here. We're just going to gently put that one on like butter. Pushed our radial bearing out a little bit, so we've got to work that down the shaft. Spoke a little too soon. Come on. So you can see this radial bearing here has popped out a little. So I'm just trying to work it back down around. There we go. Again, don't force things here. If things are fighting you, it's no big deal. Take your time and just keep working them until it starts to cooperate. So again, lots of Loctite here, but I'm really just working it in through my fingertips, all these threads, leaving most of it behind. Wiping off my finger. Again, let's not forget the washer here. And then let's go ahead and slide that in. And any of these times we're working around thrust bearings and other bearings with Loctite and whatnot, we need to be really cautious that we don't over put Loctite, because what we don't want is the Loctite to ooze out everywhere and get into the bearing, because it will seize the bearing and then the bearing doesn't work and it loses its functionality. Now, in this situation with a thrust bearing, we need to counter tighten this bolt that we put into the end of the feathering shaft and this one. So to do that, you need two, in the case of this helicopter, 4mm drivers. So I keep in my tool bag just a regular old L-shaped driver. And oops, apparently that's a 5. Let's get the 4. There it is. And now I can hold this in one hand while I hold it into the head and tighten the other side. And then what this is going to do is it's going to pull the head together. So this gap where the dampener was sticking out a tiny bit, all this is about to get compressed as we tighten this. Now, one of the cool things about these Scorpion drivers is you can actually take another driver and use a big one, as big a one as you can get through so you don't snap it, and run it. Nope, that size won't fit. Let's try this one. Run it through the driver. So now I've got an L-shaped one here, and I've got tons of torque in this hand, so I can really give this thing a really good tightening. So I'm just going to gently work this. Got to be careful with this driver on this side. You don't torque it from too far back. You'll just snap the driver in half, but we just want to give ourselves a little bit more torque. Trying to get my Allen wrench back in on this side. All right, here we go. And I'm just really making sure we got that tight. Okay, now the moment of truth. So here's how the grip should feel. You should be able to very smoothly rotate these like this, but gravity should not move it. So when I let go, it stays there. And it should feel smooth. You shouldn't feel any chunkiness or resistance or like chick, 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 chick. That's what we call notchiness. It should just feel butter smooth. And this thing, damn. Man, I swear, an XL Power head just feels like butter. SAB heads, you know, and it's by design, you know, when you put them together, they just are, they feel extra tight, and they loosen up after, you know, 3 to 5 flights or whatnot, and it's fine. But man, this thing it just gives you confidence that it's gonna be butter smooth. All right, we're gonna move to page 9 of the manual real quick, because what I want to do now is move on to these radius arms. They're sitting on my bench, all the parts are loose, and I want to go ahead and get it together. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, it says pre-assembled. And what they mean is the radius arm, which is the black plastic part, and those bearings and the pin that goes through them, that's all pre-assembled. But the screw and the washer, you do need to clean that screw, and then we need to get some Loctite on that screw, and we're going to install it into the main head. So we're going to go ahead and do this now so that those parts aren't floating around. So we'll come back to the bench, and then we're just going to look at this very carefully. We'll get ourselves in the same orientation as the manual, and you can see there's a threaded side here. That is not the hole you'll put your first one through, and then there is a non-threaded side. That is where our screw is going to go through. So we're going to take our radius arm, and let's look really carefully and figure out which one goes where. And this piece here should hook towards the center line. So basically, what I mean by that is towards the mast line. So it should point downwards from here. And then the washer actually will go behind this screw. So we're going to push this bolt through here, and then we're going to take this little teeny tiny, if you lose it and it lands on the carpet washer, you will never ever see again, and go ahead and slide this on. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and put Loctite on this bolt now, even though we're not really going to tighten it. The truth is that the Loctite will still be fine on it for our purposes here. So I'm going to put some on it now. I'd rather do that than risk forgetting to do it later. But one thing I will say is in these moments like this where you're, perhaps maybe you're going to install a bolt without Loctite, I take my phone out and I keep a running list of all of the things I need to remember to go back and do. And I do it immediately. So if I didn't put Loctite on this bolt, right now I would go to my phone and say, you know, Loctite this bolt, and, you know, list the page number, whatever reference I needed to remember it to go through. So this is actually the pinch bolt, and when it's tightened, what it does is this seam here, it'll help pinch it to the main shaft and keep this nice and square so it's sitting on the main shaft correctly, as well as obviously doing its job. Its other job, which is the radius arm. So I'm just going to go ahead and basically put this in finger tight so I don't lose the radius arm, I don't lose the washer, and I know that I've cleaned this bolt and screw. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Same thing here, this radius arm is going to go through the non-threaded side, and then the curve of this arm will go towards the center line of the mast. So we'll go ahead and put the bolt through. And then we'll put the washer, the teeny tiny washer you don't want to lose because you'll never ever see it again, on the back side, which XL Power, by the way, and a lot of other great manufacturers do include a bag of extra stuff. It's extra washers, extra shims. And so if you do lose one of these, you have a hope that it's in the spare parts bag, or something you can use in its place is there. So go ahead and slide that in there. And then, again, I'm just going to sort of finger tighten this just so I know where it is. Now, I'm going to take the Jesus bolt. This does not get Loctite on it because it goes into what's called a nylon lock nut. And this is a nut that has a plastic insert in there that adds friction. And Loctite and plastic do not go well together. So we're not going to actually use Loctite on this anyway. But I'm going to go ahead and install this in the head right now, because I just don't want to lose it. So you'll also notice the manual actually calls for you to install this on the main shaft at this point. You'll see later when we get into the setup that the way I like to level my Swashplate is without the head installed, especially because this XL Power Swash level I have requires the head to be out of the way. So I'm just going to leave this just like this, and we're going to set it aside until almost the end of the build when we go ahead and install it. So we'll take this and put it aside. Alright, with that, I've gone ahead and opened the Swashplate bag. Be cautious, as one of these little balls had already come out. Now, this is pre-assembled loosely, so all of these balls you can see are just going to come right out, and I'm going to red Loctite every single one of these. But before that, I'm just going to take them all out. And what I like to do is take all of these out first. We're going to go ahead and clean them all, even though they look pretty spotless right now already. I just like to be super safe. This guy here, I'm going to go ahead and do first so that I make sure I get it in the correct spot. So, I'm going to go ahead and clean all these things, and then we'll pick it up from there. Okay, so we've got our all of our pieces and parts here fully cleaned and ready. So now I'm going to go ahead and get some red Loctite going here, and go ahead and get these parts installed. Again, I'm going to start with the anti-rotation pin here, and get some red Loctite on there again. Wipe most of it off on my finger, and then put it in the correct spot. From there, all of these balls are interchangeable, so I'm going to go ahead and red Loctite all of them, and then when I'm done, I'll go ahead and just sort of wipe around where they go in. If any Loctite came out, paper towel and go through. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and then we'll come back. Okay, so taking a look at our manual, here's the page where we're going to build our links. And we're going to build 2 of the main rotor linkages and then 3 of our servo linkages. And our main rotor linkages, as you can see at the top there, should be 21.5 millimeters between the base of our ball links, and then our servo rod links should be 39 millimeters between. And if you look at that little graphic on the left, that little bit on the rod tells you which is reverse thread, left thread, and which is right thread, meaning they counter tighten against each other. So now that we know those links, what we're going to do is we'll do our 2 main linkages first. So we'll come back to the bench, and then we're going to use a digital caliper here, and we're going to set this for 21.5. So you can see you've got the 3 longer servo rod linkages, and then these 2 shorter ones here are going to be for our main linkages. So we're going to need 4 of these plastic guys, 1 on each side, and then we'll go ahead and get these built. SAB and their kits includes this handy dandy piece with a little bit that you can fit a ball grip in and help rotate it, and that makes life much easier. I'm also going to go ahead and grab a pair of pliers that I can grab these guys with, and then there's that little indent, which you can probably not see, but just like in the manual, it tells you which is right thread and left thread. So righty, the top one here should mean this goes on this way, so I'm going to just get it started by hand. That is what it means, and then I'm going to take this handy dandy SAB tool, which I'm sure you can order separately. There's also 3D printed versions available. I'm sure Keith Williams at KC3D probably has one available on his site. And then we're going to basically screw this in till, let's say, we don't want to feel any resistance, but when the threads disappear and stop there. And then we'll go ahead and start on the other side. Again, this one is going to be reverse thread, so you go counterclockwise to tighten it on, which I always forget and end up loosening it. And then we'll do the same thing here. Tighten these till all the threads disappear. And again, you can see this little gadget makes this a lot more pleasant than using your fingers. Alright, let's go ahead and measure. Now this 21.5 millimeters is between the grips. And this needs to go way wider. Okay, so we're there now. So then the next thing to check is the ball grip themselves. Make sure they're facing the same way, which these ball link ends have, I'm trying to see, XL Power, how they mark them. They've got kind of an extra circle, it looks like, on the side that would go into the ball. Has this sort of circle, which I'm not sure if you can see, probably not, but you can kind of see there's a little bit of a extra sort of circle-shaped piece, a little extra ring on the side that goes against the ball. So just make sure those are facing both the same way together, and that we've got 21.5 millimeters. All right, now we're going to go ahead and make one more of these and get it done. There we go. They're both facing the same direction. Let's check the guide. Again, it's really important that these be exactly the same length. You can put them up against each other. And these look good. All right, so that's our main linkages done. I'm going to go ahead and set those aside. And now we have to build 3 more here for our main servo linkages. These are going to 39 millimeters. So again, I'll take that, zero that out, and go to 39 millimeters. Exactly. All right, no need for you to watch me build 3 more of these. 39 millimeters. Make sure they're all the same. Make sure the links are all facing the same direction as you build them. All right. All right, so with that brings our first episode in the series to a close. We've gone ahead and gotten our main rotor head built. We've got our radius arms just kind of hanging out in there, ready to go. We've got our 3 main servo linkages built, our 2 main blade links ready to go, and we've gone ahead and taken care of the swash plate. So that's all set and ready to go. So that brings episode 1 to a close. In the next episode, we'll go ahead and start putting the frame together and go from there. Thanks for watching.